ऑन कर देता हूँ मोबाइल से भी, ये सर ही बोल देंगे।
ठीक है।
मक्खनलाल जी, बात हो रही थी कि शुरू किया जाए।
जी
जी, फ्रेंड्स and scholars, I'm very happy to invite you this afternoon for a presentation by an eminent scholar, Professor Makhanlal ji, on one of the most intriguing institutions of our Indian society and culture and its implications for our politics and governance. Professor Makhanlal ji is speaking about the roots of the caste system and its connectivity with the Varna system, which has much more authentic
हम
सर आप म्यूट हो गए हैं, अनम्यूट करें।
Sorry, जी। I'm very happy to invite all of you for this afternoon conversation with Professor Makhanlal on one of the central features of Indian society and culture since several centuries, the caste system. As the abstract circulated by Sheikh Iqbal Ahmed tells us that he is looking at the pre-modern period to frame and contextualize the most relevant issues about caste system today. There is some connectivity between the caste system and the census of India, organized for nearly half century by the British. There is some role of the caste system in engaging a variety of people in different parts of India with other religions, particularly Islam and Christianity. And of course, caste system is a major basis for mobilization against injustices and for promoting a society with social justice. Today's time from you is for 1 hour, so that in the first 45 minutes or so, Professor Makhanlal ji makes his presentation, and we take next 10 to 15 minutes for your questions and observations. And if time permits, I, as a student of caste and politics, may bring in a few points. I must request you to be generous with your comments and questions. For any scholar, it is the rest of the presentation. After he or she makes the presentation, they are very anxious to hear the response from learned audience like you. So please be generous and give him questions as many as possible so that he moves further in his inquiry and his scholarship. I welcome on behalf of all of you and Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, Professor Makhanlal ji, and request him to make his presentation in next 40 to 45 minutes. When 5 minutes will be left, Makhan bhai, then I'll put a polite reminder before you so that there is a bit of time management. Thank you so much. Over to Professor Makhanlal.
Thank you very much, sir. It's very kind of you for the nice word you said. I would like to first acknowledge Mr. Chairman's generosity to chair this lecture and also the friends who have joined, giving their time on it. And also I'm grateful to Nehru Memorial Museum to organize this lecture. But before I begin the actual lecture, let me tell you in 1 minute what this lecture is going to talk about so that you can correlate the whole thing rather than keep guessing what is next, what is next, and what is next. My lecture has been divided into 3 parts. First is what is Varna and Jati. This is the word which has been in Indian context. It's going to be very brief, to the point. I'm not going to get into very detail because that is not the subject of talk today. Second part will be meaning of caste, because caste includes both Varna and Jati. In one word gets over on a huge structure. And where does this word caste come from? What does it mean from where it came? Because words have a lot of meaning. When they are imported from one language to other, the meanings also get imported. And it's not that caste word come on their own. And third is third part, which is the major part, which is the main part of talk today. Imposition of the word caste over the Varna and Jati both. How did it make the change and what were the consequences? So these are the 3 aspects. 2 will be dealt with very briefly because I will have other opportunity to deal with them. And third one is the implication of caste and how the caste comes into big way in the politics, which is even today continuing. In what way? Because caste was not the politics. But as many of the things in Indian society we are carrying forward, we are burdened with various formulations that British have done it. We are still continuing, be it for education, be it for history, be it our social structure. All we are carrying what British gave us, and we have completely forgotten what we were, what was our education system, how we coped it. And consequences that we are still struggling to define ourselves in our own civilizational term. We are still struggling to make ourselves legible within our civilizational construct. And we are still struggling to govern ourselves as per our own civilizational values and rules. All that we are doing is what British gave us in 200 years and what the British administrators, what the missionaries, and what other people, Indologists, scholars gave us. And they are the one who virtually formulated all our lives. And today I'm going to talk here only about Varna and Jat. I will be using that word constantly because both of them have different meaning. Caste will be introduced in the talk where it begins to exactly the point. We have to understand one thing, that whatever the one writes, whatever an individual scholar writes, he writes as per his own upbringing, civilizational ethos, values and education. And that's why I am very clear about it. What I speak, not necessarily my other friend coming from different social background will be able to conceive the same way on the same issue. And we must know that. For example, very simple, when we talk about the history, when British came to India, they had firm belief, whether it is William Jones, whether it is Max Muller or all of them. They said we simply believe that Bible contains the kernel of truth. And according to Bible, word was created on 23rd October 404 BC, 9 a.m. morning. And always remember, in this concept, the time is linear. It's not circular. So the world begins, entire universe begins at 9 a.m. on 23rd October 4004 BC. Entire thing has to be, entire human history has to be compressed into it. Consequently, when it came to Indian situation, here you have got in terms of, yugas, in terms of kalps, in terms of other manvantars, which runs into lakhs and crores of years. And therefore it was inconceivable for them. and all the literature that contained such information, they were termed as myths because it was not fitting within their own framework of belief. And consequently, we are still struggling with the history reconstruction. Second thing, always remember, it is not very easy for anyone to coming from single belief system, single society system, to comprehend that people of multicultural dimension, people of many colors of skin, many dresses, many food habits can constitute the same society. It's not very easy for them. And therefore, there is a concept, if anything differs from the root. Root means if you believe in single book, if you believe in single set of rules, anything is spoken differently, it's a rebelliousness. And that is why any movement within Semitic religion always has gone into defining as rebelliousness, be it Protestant movement, be it Syrian movement, be it Orthodox, or take Islam, whether it is various other things. It's a rebelliousness. It is impossible for them to conceive that a multicultural, multi-religious society, multi-belief society has the freedom to keep inventing itself and keep establishing different kind of religious form. And therefore, on one hand, when you think Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism is very much part of Indic religion, Hindu religion, well, British don't think it can be part of it because it is rebelliousness. Similar is the case with the what you call Bhakti movement. So all these have created a lot of problem because of the difference in understanding and this whole dogma that entire society and entire belief system has to be one always is a problem with multicultural, multi-social, multi-belief system societies. As I said about the history, same is the problem with the Jati and Varna, which has been constantly cast. Now let us see, where does this word caste comes from? This is a Spanish word and Portuguese word, casta, C-A-S-T-A. And casta word comes into existence in 17th century AD after the Portuguese and Spanish conquest of New World. New World means South America. And there were three kind of people, racial, Europe has always believed in racialism, and that they tried to impose in India, that I will be taking up very soon. Here the issue was in 17th century, in Mexico or in New World, there were three kind of people. Spanish were there, Portuguese were there, that it means white race, there were Indian people, then black people were transported as slave trade, and there has been lot of inter-caste mingling because people are not carrying all the time with their wives or with their husbands. So it was very natural phenomenon, and consequently there were people who had mixed caste. And in casta, remember I am repeating, in casta, entire division of the society is based on purity of religion or mixing of religion. No other criteria is there. And therefore, Spanish devised 16 kind of castas in New World societies, in Spanish societies, basically in South America. Remember, the word caste is not applicable in any society in Europe. Any society, be it French, be it German, be it British, be it any. Casta word has been coined only for the South African gentry, where there has been a lot of mixing of the blood. And where does it begin? In 1492, Portuguese and Spanish conquest takes place of New World, and rest becomes history. And remember, the word casta is a racial expression. You may be, if you are a offspring of a Spanish and Indian, you are another casta. If you are a black and Spanish woman, another casta. That way, it's pure blood. And one thing is very simple. It has to be remembered. The word casta had other meanings also. Besides the racial meaning, it defined people's status and the level of taxation that has to be put in. if you are son of Spanish wife and husband, you may be taxed less. If you are son of black and Spanish, your taxation will be high. It's that kind of discrimination that was there. So altogether, as I said, there were 16 castes made out of them, and it was all then divided into ethnic types. This is this ethnic type, this is that ethnic type, based on pure blood. Caste was never a social division. Social division, when I say it was socio-racial classification and division. That has to be understood. And as you were lower down in that, taxation increased, like jizya. If you belong to this group, you will have to pay tax. You belong to this group, you may not have to pay the tax. And that, remember that this casta, C-A-S-T-A, became caste in English word. Before 17th century, this word is not there in English language. That's the word caste. Having defined that, you have to keep in mind when we come to the Indian situation. Now, Varna and Jati. Second short introduction is Varna and Jati. Rigved is there right from beginning in Hindu society. There are 4 Varnas. Remember, this is called Varna, and this Varna is directly related to your work, your vocation. There is no hierarchy at all. This hierarchy has been made up, which we will take up here. But remember that there is no mention of Jat. It's only the Varna. And Rigveda does not consider Varna to be anything else than socio-economic or vocational division, nothing else. It's very clear about it. And as a matter of fact, Jat is not only much later development, it has very little unknown, it was unknown in Vedic time. It's very important to remember that we always talk hymn 1090, 10वें मंडल का 90वां hymn, जिसमें ये चारों वर्णों के बारे में बात की गई है. But at the same time, I am surprised that, sir, nobody talks about the hymn 912. Mandal now, 112 hymn, it talks about a person is saying, my brother is soldier, I am singer, my father is physician, my mother is grinder of corn, having various occupation, desiring riches, we all 4 Varnas are in one family. Remember this very clear. I am using the word 1012. So, according to vocation, he is saying that my brother is Kshatriya, I am Brahman, my father is Vaishya, and my mother is Shudra. So, this is very clear that Varna was not related to birth, it was simply related to the work. And there should not be any doubt about it. Jati development is of much later period. We can see it in Brahmanas, we can see it Sutras. I'm not talking about Smritis yet. It's much later when there is increase in population, increase in craft activities, increase in various technologies. There people develop various kind of expertises. And that expertises are hard enough, and there were not like IITs or IT, technical training institute. People learned at their own home, whom was their school, whom was their training center, and that is how a specialized group of people appeared who started interacting among themselves, and that is what you call endogamous societies, and they slowly came to be known as Jati. And Jati was again, by birth, much later, almost about 1,500 years. It was pure economic reconstruct and social reconstruct. Economic in the sense, it was directly related to your job and vocation. Social in the sense, as of even today, normally people start interacting, our marriage relationship takes place, mostly the people of the same kind of vocation, hardly they go out of it. That has been the normal case. But you can understand how little Jat has any meaning in hierarchy, very little, any meaning in hierarchy and in society, that many of the most important kingdoms, be it Mauryas, be it Salivahanas, be it Kakatiyas, be it Yadavas, they were all founded not by Kshatriyas, they were all founded by people who will be called today Dalits or backwards or Shudras. They were all there. And actually, if you look at the Indian history, right from Maurya's time, 4th century BC, till about 11th, 12th century AD, almost about 1500 years, 90% of the kingdoms were founded by the people of depressed, so-called depressed class, so-called Shudras, and everybody knows about dynastic history, everybody knows about how they were instituted and all that. So, to say that Jat was categorized or stratified or very hard, no. It was very flexible. There was a lot of movement within the Jat system. People can join one caste, people could go into other castes, and it was actually very much visible, very much there till the arrival of British or even after that. How then all the Jat systems were related to each other? Economic system had a word. I am sure that Professor Anand Kumar will be happy with hear that word. I belong to a village, so I am aware of that word. It's called Jajmani system. In the Jajmani system, all the castes living in village and surrounding areas were related to each other because they all provided support economically, social and others to each other. And this Jajmani system was the one which was operational both at social level as well as economical level. One thing I should finish with here, and that is from Smriti's time. Smritis come to an end by 1st, 2nd century AD, and Smritis were never ideal in the society, never followed very strongly, whether it is Manu or Yagyavalkya or anybody. They are more a theoretical formulation, but from Smriti's time till the arrival of British, you will be shocked and surprised. There is hardly any literature on caste system or Jati and Varna, hardly any literature. All the people were participating everywhere, and as I said, 90% of the Maharajas and Rajas and rulers were from so-called backward class, untouchable class, Dalit or Sad. So that is why when you think in 19th century, before 1857, more than 70% of India north of Maharashtra were ruled by Marathas, whether it is Holkar, whether it is Gaikwads, whether it is Sindhiyas. Now they are asking for reservation because they are deepest class. So just imagine where we are going. Having given the background, very brief background I have taken, let us now see that where we understood and where we were classified British, and whatever the caste system today we have, whatever the caste system we have today, whatever the caste system we got in 1947, it's all pure gift of British, pure reconstruction, which has nothing to do with the reality. As I said, that perception, thinking and writing process is influenced by civilizational background, social background and so on, and therefore for them it was impossible to believe multicultural, multi-religious society can be there. And it is very difficult for them to believe that way. And as I said, that when it came to thinking religion, they never thought that Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism can be part of the one religion, search for more and more models. They always thought it is rebellion, exactly the way whether it is our Protestants or whether it is Syrian church, whether it is Orthodox church or many other, it was all rebellion for them. So when you practice exclusivity all the time, you are not able to recognize that there can be inclusivity in other societies. And as I said, beginning of the whole issue, our whole issue begins with the arrival of missionaries. Missionaries only, and this is before the British political power. When missionaries arrived in India, their only job was to convert people to Islam or to Christianity. And what was important thing was they were trying to convert individuals. Many individuals converted, and the major problem that came up, which Christian missionaries' writings are full of it. I'm not quoting here, but meanwhile somewhere I will give references. They say that when an individual gets converted to Christianity, he loses his property right, he loses his family, he loses his society. Caste is such a strong thing, everybody dreads leaving that caste because he becomes a person non grata. And you will be surprised to know that one reason they say Christian missionaries, they say that it's very difficult to challenge Brahmanas morally, mentally, and intellectually. And therefore, we are finding it very difficult. And they identify one person because of whom there is a problem with the conversion. And they said that these are the reasons because of which we are unable to convert people in desirous way. In 1850, Governor General passed a law. I think it was, I'll tell you the exact date on which it was passed, that it is called property disability right, that a person, if he converts to another religion, he will not lose his property rights. This was directly aimed to a whole thing as we are talking about. Lord Cornwallis writes on 27 December 1778, the fear of losing, 1778 he is writing, 27 years, the fear of losing caste is making conversion almost impossible. That's Lord Cornwallis. Abed Weiss, everybody knows, Manners and Customs of Hindus, he writes, mentally and intellectually, Indians are far superior to us. I'm quoting them original. Even those who were converted by missionaries found that this is a fact of truth even today. Even those who went out of the caste system, they were converted by the missionaries, they adopted a new religion, but carried with them all that was there with Jat and Jat itself. And that is why you know today, in the Islam, in the Christianity and everywhere else, Jat is prevalent. That original Jat they carried from Hindu society, that's very... And there has been a great debate in church. If you look at the whole church literature, there has been great debate that in this situation where they are carrying the Jatian practices also, what should we do? So church decides that let the people get converted along with their Jat and everything else that is there with Jat. And that's the reason, whether it is Islam, whether it is Christianity, they accepted Jat very well. So in order to remove the fear of losing property after the conversion, this law of 1850, caste disability, was passed. And this was done by Lord Dalhousie. Under his signature, this law was passed. And there was another strategy planned at that time. Rather than concentrating on individual, because if he goes out, he feels lonely. He has lost his brothers, he has lost parents, he has lost his society. Best would be to concentrate on converting the whole group, whole village, so that individual is not at loss to understand. So till here, caste was taken with a lot of care, with lot of, I will say, sympathy, also not crudely. That's very important. Comes 1857, and that's watershed for the Indian history and also for the British. But 1857, I will not go in politics of it, but I will go how did it impact caste system. 1857 set the ball rolling for British. And actually, for the first time, they started seriously talking in terms of not Varna and Jat, club the whole thing and talk in terms of caste and a new meaning and new terms. I have spoken to you that words do not go on their own. They are brought in, and words are never brought in naked or stripped of their meaning. They come along with their meaning and they come with all their context. And therefore, caste came in use in big way. On 28th May 1857, there was a missionary magazine called Friends of India. It was published from Calcutta. It wrote that this was war between Christianity versus Brahmanism. So now, clear identification of enemy has begun. It was not between British state and Indian state. It was between Christianity and Brahmanism, not between British and Hindu society or Indians. And at that time, one of the most influential missionary was, we all know, Alexander Duff. Alexander Duff was most respected and influential man. He wrote that if the government has acted against, he wrote within the court, if the government had acted against Jati Vyavastha, caste system, then the whole structure of Hinduism would have collapsed. After all, Jati is the basis of the strong structure of Hinduism. That's Alexander, unquote. And then there was another Jesuit father, Wiley from Calcutta. They were all very influential people. He writes in 1858, while we are analyzing the causes of rebellion, we must accept that Jati was the main cause for 1857. So whatever we historians keep saying, best is to go to the sources. And you don't have to go very far. National Archives is very nearby. All the files are there, and I have been happy going there off and on to look at what the original files contain. So within quote, Jesuit Bible says, while we are analyzing the cause of rebellion, we must accept that Jat was the main cause, caste was the main reason. If there was no Jat and no caste, there would have been no 1857 rebellion. That's another very influential. But let us see what the commission, the British are not like we Indians. If we lose, we sit down at home and chhati pito and row. If we win, celebrate and get drunk and forget about it. No, not British. Once they lost 1850, they did not lose. Once they faced 1857, there was a great debate within the British administration, army, and the government. Why did it happen? How could an army which was so well fed, who was so well maintained by us, how could it revolt against us? Why did it happen? Huge correspondence is available in National Archives where people are doing their own analysis. And remember then on 15th July 1858, a commission was established by British under Major General Jonathan Peel. It's known as Jonathan Peel Commission. And everybody submitted that. If you look at that report, India Office Library has got it. What he concludes is amazing. This is conclusion by the commission, not by individual. The cause of rebellion were Brahmanas. Cause of rebellion were Brahmanas who were in considerable number in army. In the Brahmanas, it is the Brahmanas who provide mental, moral and material leadership to the Indian people of all castes, all jat. Without discrediting the leadership of Brahmana. Now, please underline, within quote I am saying, without discrediting the leadership of Brahmana, it will not be possible to break the jati system, caste system, and without breaking it, we cannot rule India. This is not a historian. This is not an ordinary man. This is the chief of a commission that was appointed by British government. He is writing in his conclusion. In self-retrospection, meaning thereby, look at the way they are concluding, Brahman is the whole cause of the problem. सारी समस्या की जड़ ये ब्राह्मण नाम की चीज है हिंदू समाज में. So in self-retrospection, British decided to reduce, these are all part of the notings, Brahmanas' participation, this is all, I have great details into that. British decided officially to reduce the Brahmanas' participation in army and administration. Army Secretary to Government of India, Major General Birch writes, Army Secretary, he is not in army but sitting in the Secretariat. I saw from my own eyes that commanding officer of a company was an officer of ordinary caste. But immediately after the parade, the officer went to Brahmin Sipahi, prostrated in front of him and touched his feet. Similar story had been recited by Sir John Lawrence, Bombay's governor, and Lord Elphinstone, and many others. And therefore, it was British perception, like all of us know, break the leadership first. Don't go after the crowd. Catch the leader and finish it off. What is remarkable, very remarkable, when you read historians, when you read reformulation of the scholars, I'm not talking about the documents, you will see that people were very tired of Brahmanas, very tired of their atrocities. They always wanted to come out of the clutches of Brahmanas. But the issue is, there is not a single document, petition, this and that and so on, against by the Hindu society, by the Hindu caste, by the Hindu world, by the Hindu Jat, that we want to be out of Brahmana's influence. There wasn't an influence because Brahmana did not control anything. All that was their moral authority, character authority. In his report, Sir John Lawrence writes that, within quote, influence of Brahmanas on other Jat was due to reverence and respect, unquote. I repeat, Sir John Lawrence writes, influence of Brahmanas on other Jat was due to reverence and respect. Last year, when the officers of high caste, last year he is writing in 1859 and he is talking about 1858 and 57. Last year means 1857. When the officers of higher caste revolted, then even the lower caste employees who were involved in petty and menial works like fixing the tent, cutting the grass for cattle, tending horses, etc., followed up the upper caste like sheep. These are his words. Followed up the upper caste like sheep. They refused to listen to British officers. Thus, the real enemy has been now identified. The leader of the group, leader of the society has been identified, and as the law of the game goes, you catch the king, you catch the leader, you don't go for small little pawns and everything, and that's what happens. Not more than 10 minutes, sir, though you said. So, 1857's rebellion or war or suddenness of it made British to realize that there is something beyond geography, beyond worship system, beyond belief in God, beyond food habit that binds everybody. And they zeroed on to Varna and Jat, which was based on social and economic system. Now, expressing his concern, the then Secretary of State in India in 1858 writes to Viceroy Lord Elgin, if the entire India gets united against us, how long can we stand? That Secretary of State is writing to Lord Elgin, the Viceroy. And then he says, only way is to divide and rule. This word is from his Secretary of State of India to Lord Elgin for the first time, divide and rule. And that becomes the Mool Mantra of the British.
This is year?
Huh?
Year? This is divided.
58. Oh, 59. Achha, once this was identified, caste was identified as main cause of 1857 problems, a large number of scholars, missionaries, they started requesting and writing. If you look at the whole literature on caste system, you will find amazing flood on writing on caste system after 1857. And some of them, like Alexander Duff, John Wilson of Bombay, Reverend Jesse Hardy, they were first one to write detail. And you know then, something which was praised by them, by British themselves, pre-1857, the caste becomes a thing to despise. You know, Duff in 1850 wrote a book called What is the Caste? How the Christian Government Should Deal with It. Alternatively, it was published, Indian Rebellion and Its Causes. And he writes, Duff explains, within quote, Jat system is enemy of material progress, intellectualism, patriotism, and liberalism. So, a game begins where Jat itself has to be painted as villain.
डॉक्टर साहब हम लोग के पास 5 मिनट आपके लिए और है 5 मिनट
10 मिनट दे दीजिए, खत्म हो जाएगा ये.
ठीक है ठीक ठीक.
So, because I'm on the most crucial part at the moment. Duff tried to explain this, and he says that Jat is the main hindrance path of the progress. Without removing, no progress can be made. So, something which was uniting India, something which was great intellectual, that becomes a problem. So, the agenda is now set up. With the agenda set up, Max Muller advises in 1863, within quote again, in India, Jat has been there in one form or other. Right from beginning, we may not accept it as a religious institution, but it has been developing as a social institution over millennia, an entire edifice of Hindu society. We have to be extremely cautious on the question of Jat. So, the breakup of Jat and its unity has to be dealt with very, very, very carefully. I am just coming on concluding part. So if Jat cannot be removed, destroyed, then how to use it to their own advantages? And formulations were made. They are all published. You want to just look carefully. 3 formulas were made. Create animosity, competition and hatred among the castes. So Varna and Jat have disappeared. Kasta has come in. Create hatred for the institution of caste among the educated people. Bring Macaulay back, white sahib in brown skin. And make them to believe that India can progress in casteless society. And to achieve both the above points, it is important that those who were revered in Hindu society, those who provided the leadership to the Hindu society, they should be discredited. So these were the 3 issues. So Varna and Jat got clubbed in caste, and to achieve that classification, leadership have to be discredited. In this whole issue now, census, this is last part, sir, I will complete it in less than 5 minutes. In census begins a great role.
Very well, very well.
You had mentioned that, sir, I am very happy. So census plays a great role. Earlier census was done Hindu, Muslim, Christian and Zoroastrian. But then in 1871, in order to show that Hindus are not such a large number, Buddhists, Jains and Sikhs are out, and they start debating whether the scheduled caste, scheduled tribe have to be out. But anyway, that takes place later on. So one by one, what you are seeing is that scheduled caste, scheduled tribe without, then Dalits are out of Hindu society. I'm talking about census from 1771 to 1931. And 1931 census is based for Mandal Commission and even today's reservation policy. But look at that, Dalit goes out, then depressed class is classified, where all these are coming about. So it was touted by the British that these Hindus do not have caste, and of late, Anand sir knows that there is a word which has been thrown into this, caste Hindu, a non-caste Hindu. God knows what does that mean. And for all the ills of the society, this caste system and Brahmanas were squarely blamed, be it education system, which was destroyed by them. If somebody asks the question, I would like to dilate upon it. Whether economic system, India was, after all, Britain, when British came here to rule, India was exporting 24% of the world GDP. How could it have gone to less than 1% in 1947? It's the British destroyed the economy, British destroyed the education system and entire social fabric. And they claim to give us something very grand. Last 2 minutes, sir, Anand sir, I am very grateful for your patience. At the end of, I'm talking about a great intellectual, a Christian historian, and also a historian I respect and also hate, both. Professor V.A. Smith, Vincent Arthur Smith. In 1918, when the document was, Montagu-Chelmsford document was prepared to give a kind of democratic facade to India, and individual voting rights were proposed. Vincent Smith wrote a document and forwarded to British Parliament, and document is available on net. I have the printout, I did not bring it here. It's called Indian Constitutional Reforms Viewed in the Light of History. And he writes that I have been 29 years as ICS officer in India, 50 years as a person who has tried to understand history, civilization, and society. Therefore, I think I have a right to speak on the issue. And he writes, I will quote that, sir. Smith said, those who have made these documents have no idea about the Indian society. He argued that Jat is not a dress or cover of a book which can be removed and worn as and when you like. It has its own place in Indian civilization. It is all in the blood and flesh of Indian people, and it is their identity. No one can think of breaking from his or her Jati or Varna. Therefore, to believe, now this is the concluding part of V.A. Smith on Montagu-Chelmsford report. Therefore, to believe that this document can create simply a casteless society is like chasing a mirage. The path is, this path will only strengthen the caste system rather than weakening it. Just imagine prophetic word he is talking about in 1918, and as a matter of fact, he says that Jati and Varna will not only become stronger, if I can say one line, that V.A. Smith has spoken to begin with. After all, we know that 1940, 1950, our constitution is 1936 India Act, revised. So V.A. Smith says in 1918, to begin with, lower caste people will not be able to see even how a polling booth would look like, because upper caste people will vote their vote. But as the time passes, the Jati will become the strongest thing from this constitution, and look at where we are. But what is very important is, if you look at serious documentation and files, when 1918 and 1935 documents were prepared for Indian constitution, British precisely were not working for a casteless society. If you look their readings in the census and others, they were working for a constitution which will destroy India on the caste line on its own, and they can wash their hands off. Thank you very much for all of you, for all your patience, and thank you, Anand sir, for your patience.
Thank you very much, Makhanlal ji. He gave us a broad view from the ancient times, Rigvedic hymnas, to the colonial discourse post 1857. He allows us many spaces for deepening our concern and inquiry. So may I request first Sri Ganju and then Mr. Sirajuddin. These are two people who have written in the chat box. Others who are interested in asking questions may also put in their questions. So I request first Sri Ganju to put his question.
Good afternoon, Professor Makhanlal.
Very grateful to you to have joined. Thank you.
Thank you. I am actually enlightened listening to you on this Jati business, because there is a lot of debate and controversies on it. And I am not exactly a student of history to really say anything much on this. But what my question is, because in your entire discourse, you have been what you have said is that how colonial system or how British rule was really instrumental in making this caste system a useful tool for themselves. But after the independence, once we were relieved of this British rule, and we had our own government, and we understood the caste system and its good and bad points also, but we rather strengthened it and we did not abolish it. So, what were the reasons for that? Was it more a political reason, or the system had become so strong that we were
Thank
not
you.
able?
Thank you. Sirajuddin Saab. Mr. Sirajuddin, please put your question. Please unmute yourself. आप अपने को unmute कर ले.
Am I audible now?
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Professor Anand Kumar Saab, for giving me an opportunity. First of all, I would like to thank Professor Makhan Lal for presenting a very lucid presentation. And I should also acknowledge that in one of my webinar, he happened to be the chairperson and he presided over the webinar on the cost aspects, which I presented some 3 months before in the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library. And I have got a few remarks. Though it was a very good presentation, I have my own remarks on this thing. Being a student of anthropology, I have read a lot of literature on the cost of historical processes. I would like to bring to the kind attention of Professor Makhan Lal. I think he has focused a lot on the colonial aspects, on the origin, on the nomenclature of the caste as such. But I would like to bring to his attention the seminal works done by Professor M.N. Srinivas and Professor J.S. Gurhe. They have done mostly on the historical processes, starting from the Rigvedic period up to the pre-British area also, how the caste has taken its origin, what is its social ramification, what is the social structure, social stratification, how the famous M.N. Srinivas coining of the word Sanskritization, that is how a lower caste try to upgrade itself by getting married into the higher caste group, and so many other mechanisms. I would like to get his reaction to these various aspects, whether he has a time, whether he would like to give any comment on to this sociological aspect, sociological phenomenon of caste, leaving aside the British or colonial aspect into this discourse, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you. May I ask Dr. Nandini Bhattacharya Panda to put her question? Dr. Nandini Bhattacharya Panda. Miss Lipika Roy, would you like to put your question? These are two people. Miss Seema Yadav. Miss Seema Yadav.
Hello.
Okay, so I go to.
Yes, sir. I have already
Professor
put
Makhan Lal
my
ji.
question in the message box.
Lipika Roy, would you like to put your question? Lipika Roy.
Yes, sir.
Yes, would you like to say it?
Yes, sir. I have already asked a question in the comment box that
Professor Kapil Kumar ji, sure.
in Northeastern Samaya.
I can't.
Yeah, first Lipika Roy ji, then Professor Kapil Kumar. Lipika
Okay,
Roy
sir.
ji.
Yes, sir. So in northeastern part of India, we have seen there are so many communities, indigenous people, they have converted themselves into Christianity. So due to the feeling of discrimination, they have converted into Christianity. So my question is that, what do you feel in present day context, the sense of revivalism, are they feeling the sense of revivalism towards their old animism and totemism? And what is your viewpoint on that? Because in Tripura we have this Burma, in Assam we have Boros. They used to do Batho Puja and many kind of animism, but now they have converted themselves into Christianity, and due to the feeling of discrimination of caste system. So, what is your point of view on that, sir? The sense of revivalism, do they feel, and what is your input on that.
Dr. Nandini Bhattacharya Panda, would you like to put your question?
Thank you, sir. I am enlightened by your lecture, Professor Makhan Lal. It is fascinating. But I just want to draw your attention that there are two texts which intrigues me and many, of course. One is Manusmriti, which is considered as the text for understanding the caste system in India. That is a pre-colonial text. Another text is by H.H. Risley's Tribes and Castes of Bengal. Those are really practical guide to to dominate, to code, and it was a knowledge enterprise to rule the country. So may I ask your opinion on these two texts as text to regulate and to situate the power structures in India in two different times. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bhattacharya Panda. Professor Kapil Kumar, your question, please.
Thank you, Professor Anand. My slight observation and one or two small questions. First is, Professor Makhan Lal, I'd like to know, as I'm hearing in the discussion also, that people talk of Manusmriti and people talk of ancient systems and castes and all wrong into it. Exactly what is it the term caste which is there in Manusmriti or Mahabharata and all that? And why people look at only Manusmriti from one angle? And why not the instances of Yudhishthira and all the Yaksh Samvad, etc. in Mahabharata? Why this confusion between caste and commune? Overnight, in the first century itself, many of our communities, Teli, Dhobi, Nai, Lohar, they were not castes in any sense. They were communities. And overnight, the Britishers convert them into lower castes in this kind of a thing. My second thing is that the moment people start talking of this caste, which is a totally wrong notion, which I agree in the Indian context, because casta is something totally different, and imposing that casta concept in terms of Indian caste and Indian society was racial in those terms. Why is it everything that caste is only when it comes to ancient India? And then caste jumps on to modern India. Show me a single word by any of our great historians or sociologists or anthropologists who have talked of Dalit in medieval India. Had the Dalit disappeared when the Mughal rule came to India and then came back again in India to be suppressed? What was the condition of Dalits? In spite of all evidences available, that in a district of Bahrain there was a concept of Gogru. And how this condition of Dalits was influenced by the feudalism which existed during the medieval period in this country is ignored. Another two things I'll give you evidence. When was the commode introduced in India? I have the experience of a very eminent professor from JNU, from the B.R. Ambedkar Center, cursing Hinduism for man and scavenging in India. And when I questioned him, that scavenging is not Indian culture. Even today the Prime Minister is saying have toilets. So when did this culture came? And she said, they were baths. They were not toilets. And there are ample references in literature of medieval period that it was the Turks who brought the commode to India, and when conversions were taking place in India, those who refused to convert in many cases were told, if you don't convert, we will make you do this job. And that is one reason that Hinduism prevails very strongly among many of these Dalit communities so-called today. But that is not taken into account. The condition of Dalit during 1947. And last observation I make, sir, 1857, you have rightly mentioned out. Please bring out the observations of the great social reformer, Sayyid Ahmad Khan Sahab, in the Dastane Gadar, what he says to the British.
Ahle Kitab.
And all about the Muslim community, not Hindu.
Ahle
He
Kitab.
used the word all these Muslims who participated in 1857 were Badjat Badmash. Badjat is the word he used. And look at his famous statement when Mohammedan Emdal Oriental College is formed in Aligarh, where he says it is not meant for Ikkewalas. And then this whole concept of divided rule, that's why I asked you a question in between about that Viceroy's letter and all, where he writes it that you made the Muslims and Hindus stay together in regiments, so they became one. You should have followed the policy of Nadir Shah when he went to Iran and he made it separate for Afghans and separate for Persians, so he can use them each against each other. And when he proposes that let there be an Anglo-Muslim alliance, you have been the rulers, we have been the rulers, and Hindus need to be ruled. And last observation is, where did the concept of criminal crimes and criminal caste came in India? 1857. The Gujars of Ghaziabad and Bulandshahr, they fought against the British. So the Gujars of Ghaziabad and Bulandshahr are criminal caste. The Gujars of Meerut are not criminal caste. The Gujars of Muzaffarnagar are again criminal caste. The way this division took place by the British society and the concept of martial races. Who brought this concept of martial races and martial castes in this country? It was the British who brought this aspect. In Indian, it was any Kshatriya was open to anyone who could have taken two arms.
Thank you, Professor Kapil Kumar. Thank you. Thank you.
It's a very complicated question, sir. And the last time is after 47. When this question comes that why it continued, well, Nehru continued with the entire British policies after 47. So we see an advance where it was a departure from the British policies adopted. Earlier, the British policy was divide and rule, and after 47, the policy was rule and divide.
Thank you, Professor Kapil Kumar ji. Now I request Professor Makhan Lal ji to take care of these points. In his response, I request the participants to allow us 10 more minutes because we have already met the time deadline. It's 2 minutes past 4. But discussion has become very alive. Shri Ganju, Shri Sirajuddin, Vinod Jauhari, Nandini Bhattacharya Panda, Seema Yadav, Lipika Roy, and Kapil Kumar ji have put very interesting issues for our consideration. Professor Makhan Lal ji, you have 5 minutes to cover them.
Thank you, sir. I take a first, Professor Ganju, that despite knowing all these problems with the caste, why have we not taken care in post-independence time? Remember that in so-called, it could be blasphemous or it could be a statement against the state. Our so-called constitution that was signed on 26th December 1950 is revised version of India Act 1935. It's not anything independent constitution. If you go through the Constituent Assembly debate, they are in 13 volumes, but they have bound together in 8 volumes. I have gone through it. Everywhere you will find. So, Act 1935, clause this is, it stands, altered at that. It stands corrected as that. In India Act 1935, there was a provision for giving the reservation for this caste, that caste, including separate electorate. Path to follow easy is a normal case. Following the easy path of caste is both beneficial as well as powerful. In order to create a more cohesive thing is much more difficult. Like, it's very easy to create problems with 10 people, but it's almost difficult, impossible to create a very good team of working together. So it has all historical meaning, Dr. Ganju. I wish what you said had happened. Sirajuddin Sahab, I am quite aware, and actually I am each and every word. I have read Caste and Tribe by G.S. Ghurye. It remains seated on table. My problem with G.S. Ghurye, my problem with M.N. Srinivas is very of different level. Look at the references of G.S. Ghurye. It's full of physical anthropologists and he begins and ends with Herbert Risley. Entire presumption is based on, cephalic and nasal index, which was so much discredited around the world, except it got great success in India. Who will believe today in racial theory? Racial theory was discredited, and as a matter of fact, Risley's entire theory was rejected everywhere except in Indian census report. And no disrespect to Hemant Srinivas, no disrespect to G.S. Ghurye, whom I saw, whom I met when I was doing PhD in Pune, and he was living in Bombay. But the problem is their model. Their model is based on entire British structure and system, and therefore, in today's discourse, I think that whole of physical anthropology has become redundant. I was here in this very room when you gave your talk on Orissa, and I think it was on the field survey on Orissa or somewhere like that, and I was very much there, if you recall. So in today's context, those things have become very redundant. And today when you talk, when Risley was talking about Aryans, Indo-Aryans, Dravidians, Indo-Dravidians, Mongolites, and Negroids, do you think that today we need to discuss and talk about that? Great scholarship, hats off to them in their own time. I think with the time changes, theories change. Today in the DNA's time, when genome says that entire South Asian population comes from one pool of genome, what is the issue of Aryan, Dravidian and Mongolites and Negroids and this and that? And that's why I'm aware of their work, but at the moment, I think when they wrote, they may have had great prevalence, but today, in the context of anthropology itself, in the context of DNA studies itself, in the context of genome study itself, I think they have lost their meaning now. Nandini Bhattacharya. Manu Smith, I don't know how many people in this hall, in this section, have seen, leave alone read. Manu Smriti, translated by Bihler, is almost about 700 pages. And in that, on the cast, there are only 14 slokas. In Manu Smriti, there are more than 3,500 slokas. 3.5. Nobody talks about that. One slok is there which talks about not the caste, but in terms of Shudra. And remember, Shudra was directly related not by birth, but it was related by job. Being unclean. If there is somebody very unclean, would you allow them to enter and sit on your sofa? It's a social system he was talking about. He was neither talking about racial, he was not talking about. One has to see. I wrote a book. I remember I gave it to Anandji. It's called Political and Legal Ideas and Institution. And in that process, I studied based on Smritis and Dharma Sutras. In that process, for almost 20 years, I studied Smritis intermittently. And rest assured, Manu Smith does not deserve what it has been given to and what it has been quoted to. It has been often wrongly quoted and wrongly translated. Somebody has to study that. And you were talking about a book about West Bengal caste and tribe. Since I have not seen it yet, I would refrain to comment on that. Seema Yadav sir took the name, but I have not heard any question from her, so I don't know what to say. About Ms. Roy's question, sense of revivalism and caste system in Northeast. Again, I should express my limitation in terms of not very well versed and not commenting on top of the head or half information has not been my really nature. Last but not least, Professor Kapil Kumar's, most of the things were observations and very welcome, sir. But I'd like to tell you only one point. And when you say lower caste, upper caste, there was nothing like lower caste, upper caste. It was Jati and Varna. And hold on, no, please. There was never any lower caste, upper caste, Dalit and depressed caste, nothing like that. There was no caste also. It was only Varna and Jati, and Varna and Jati were vocational. And entire caste system, so-called caste system, ya Jati and Varna system, was joined together with Jajmani system. Those who belong to village they know what the Germani system is there. And as far as any work on the caste system during medieval period, there is none. I had spoken that. And with that, sir, I end my talk and thank to Chairman, sir, for giving the opportunity to reply.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Makhan Lal ji. I'm very sure that for all of us, at the moment, there are around 30 people in this gathering through internet. Professor Makhan Lal has stirred our minds. He has invited us. In fact, in some cases, even challenged us to look at our knowledge level, and has given a good reading list to go deeper into this perennial problem of caste system, its past, its present, and its future. For us sociologists, such contributions are very meaningful because they bring in classical texts, they bring in the relevance and role of the colonial administrators, the missionaries patronized by the colonial administrators, and the Indological literature. Caste is interconnected with religion. So it is not only a Hindu phenomena, as he pointed out, that even church found it useless to fight caste, and they preferred to allow caste provided there was continuity of conversion. We have scholars like Professor Imtiaz Ahmad talking about caste among the Muslims in India. And if we look at the stories of various colonial regimes, Professor Kapil Kumar ji mentioned about the Dutch and their insistence on bringing in a new kind of sanitation technology through commodes, and people engaged in sanitation were losing their status and respect and dignity. We also have a large literature starting from Kabir up to Dayanand and Vivekanand, where caste makes engagements of very many types. And of course, all these people are also telling us the way out of caste, how to ignore the intermediary role between caste and religion, caste and power, caste and authority. I'm very happy that Makhan Lal ji entered into a domain where generally people avoid talking because it's a very controversial part. Victims of the caste system are there. It is for all to recognize. And if you talk about caste as a colonial implantation, many others who have looked at the colonial discourse as very authentic, including we sociologists, we start feeling as if this person who is trying to invite us to deconstruct our understanding is a hidden supporter of the caste system or Brahminical hegemony. So it's not,
Fortunately, I am not a Brahmin, sir. So I should like to declare that.
it's not easy to talk about caste system
Yes.
and Varna system. It's not easy to talk about the need to have a careful reading of the discourse of caste. And I'm very happy that Nehru Memorial Museum and Library thought it appropriate to invite a scholar of substance like Professor Makhan Lal. And I'm more happy that around 30 people joined us through this technology to listen to Makhan Lal ji. And much more than that, there were at least 8 people who asked questions or offered comments to Makhan Lal ji. So he must be going home today with great satisfaction. We conclude this session with great joy because invitation to learn knowledge, invitation to learning, invitation to separate the fact with fiction is always very welcome for all of us who are interested in ideas, narratives, and challenges before us. I thank Nehru Memorial to engage me to chair this session. And instead of taking your time, I hope that today's questions, today's observations, today's clarifications will help people like us to be more interested and more engaged in understanding our social order, our heritage, the permutations and combinations introduced to maintain their hegemony by the colonial rulers, and the challenge before us as an independent society in terms of Indian civilization. Thank you very much. I hope that we will have another invitation from Iqbal and other friends in near future for another similar opportunity. Thank you very much. Over to Shri Iqbal Ahmed for any operational comments or suggestions. It looks like that he will reach us through their own emails and other things. Thank you, Makhan Lalji, and thank you all.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.